Welcome back to The Explainer. Today we're diving into Module 12, the final piece of our cleaning validation course. Now, we're not going to rehash all of the foundational theories of Stage 1 or Stage 2 today. You already know that stuff. Instead, we are taking a forensic deep dive into real-world cleaning validation disasters. We're talking strictly about what happens when theory is completely ignored on the shop floor. We'll be looking at actual industry failures, FDA warning letters, and EU GMP findings to extract the hard lessons. So, you don't have to learn them the expensive way. Okay, let's dive into this. Today's agenda is basically a clinical autopsy of industry failures. We're looking at 1. The cost of complacency. 2. Flawed science and limits. 3. Hidden system blind spots. 4. Process and execution drift. 5. Cultural root causes. And finally, 6. Building a learning organization. So, starting right off with Section 1, the cost of complacency, high stakes in validation. Let's frame the immediate danger of treating compliance like a simple check-the-box exercise. $100 million. Let that number sink in for a second. That was the staggering remediation cost for just a single facility. And why? Because analysts at this site figured out how to disable their chromatography software's audit trails to secretly perform peak reintegrations. And they did this over multiple years. It literally took a whistleblower to bring the whole thing to light. This led to a massive for-cause inspection, a consent decree, court-monitored remediation, and multiple products being yanked right off the market. Which forces a really uncomfortable but absolutely necessary question. Could this happen at your facility? I mean, are your site's technical controls actually configured to prevent human tampering, or are you kind of just relying on operators to behave well? Because let me tell you, when procedural controls rely on human behavior rather than locked technical prevention, you are leaving the door wide open for a catastrophic failure. Moving on to Section 2, Flawed Science and Limits, the analytical autopsies. Let's look at our first technical failure archetype. This is where outdated scientific methods end up masking severe risks. Take the hormone carryover case, for example. A manufacturer used generic dose-based criteria for shared equipment that was making both hormonal contraceptives and regular over-the-counter pain meds. Well, it completely failed at submicrogram levels. We're talking unexpected hormonal effects in patients just taking pain meds, which obviously sparked massive recalls. The lesson here? High-potency compounds absolutely demand health-based exposure limits, or HBLs, not generic criteria. Then we have the recovery surprise. A generic manufacturer just assumed a flat 70% recovery rate for all surfaces, basically because that's what their stainless steel yielded. But when an audit dug deeper, they found that recovery on PTFE and gaskets was as low as 15%. They were passing locations that were actually heavily contaminated. Recovery studies must be material-specific. And finally, the outdated limits case. One facility was still relying on a 1998 1 in 1,000th dose criteria. When regulators finally forced them to use modern HBL derivation, they found out the actual safe carryover was 100 times lower than they thought. So you have to proactively update legacy criteria before a regulator forces you to. And this brilliantly illustrates the massive chasm between legacy methods and modern practices. Holding on to those outdated 1 in 1,000th dose limits, or using blanket 70% recovery rates for all surfaces, that creates massive, invisible blind spots. Modern practices demand toxicologically grounded, HBL-based limits and material-specific testing for things like PTFE and gaskets. Science evolves, right? And your validation program has to evolve right along with it, proactively, not just when an inspector's breathing down your neck. All right, Section 3, Hidden System Blind Spots, Beyond the Equipment Surface. Let's pivot to failures where the cleaning validation program was just way too narrowly focused. These cases really highlight what happens when teams work in silos. First up, the penicillin HVAC case. A site formally segregated their penicillin and non-penicillin products. Sounds good, right? But they totally missed the HVAC system. Shared return air carried airborne penicillin particulates directly into non-penicillin areas. Cleaning the equipment surfaces perfectly meant absolutely nothing because the contaminant was literally in the air. 18 batches were recalled. You have to talk to your HVAC engineers. In the disabled audit trail case we touched on earlier, the validation team tested all the operational features of the software, but completely missed the configuration controls that allowed the audit trail to be turned off. A whistleblower had to step in, triggering a consent decree. Validation has to include IT security. And look at the cleaning agent residue case. A parenteral manufacturer tested rigorously for API residues, but they completely ignored the cleaning agent itself.
bad rinse-out left behind unvalidated cleaning agents that caused elevated pH in the parenterals. Remember, cleaning agents are themselves contaminants that require rigorous validation.
That brings us to Section 4, Process and Execution Drift, when practice strays from design. Let's see how this builds into our third archetype, facilities that set up good programs but let their daily execution drift over time. So, the crucial point is that validation is a continuous life cycle, not a one-time event you just stick in a binder. Look at the sampling gap. A manufacturer swabbed 5 really easy-to-reach spots on a granulator, but completely ignored the chopper blade, the hardest to clean spot, just because it was inconvenient. Sampling locations must be based on worst-case design challenges, never operator convenience. Then there's worst-case drift. A facility identified their worst-case product 8 years ago. Since then, they expanded their high-potency portfolio, but never reevaluated their worst-case matrix. The worst case isn't static. It has to be reevaluated annually and with every new product. What about skipped stage 3? A site did their 3-batch validation back in 2018 and called it a day. No routine TOC or conductivity monitoring was ever done. Let me be clear. A 3-batch run without stage 3 continued verification is entirely incomplete. Finally, manual variability. A site passed validation using their absolute best, most experienced pro. But routine daily operators had vastly different techniques, leading to wildly variable residue results. Manual cleaning demands extreme procedural detail and structured operator qualification.
Next up, Section 5, Cultural Root Causes, the Human Element. It's time to shift our focus from technical gaps to the underlying human denominator connecting all these disasters. Because technical failures, they don't happen in a vacuum. Behind every single technical failure we just reviewed, one of these cultural warning signs was festering. We're talking about pressure to make inconvenient findings quietly disappear, or senior leaders being totally absent from quality reviews in the shop floor. How about using the excuse, "we've always done it this way," as a decisive argument to shut down improvement? Or dismissing external industry events as, "well, that's not us." You also see open CAPAs just accumulating in the system with zero urgency, or QA engagement coming in way too late, if at all. This kind of toxic culture inevitably leads to what we call the couldn't happen here trap. It's a highly dangerous 3-step cycle to disaster. Step 1, superficial dismissal. The team actually reviews an industry warning letter, but they brush it off, saying, "oh, they use a different operational setup. That doesn't apply to us." Step 2, selective disclosure. An internal near miss happens, but it's investigated quietly. No updates to cross-functional teams, no sharing lessons with industry networks. And then Step 3, the repeat failure. 6 months later, the exact same catastrophic pattern strikes their own local facility. A lack of pattern recognition and a defensive mindset absolutely guarantee that industry history will repeat itself right in your backyard. Finally, Section 6, building a learning organization, the prescription. Let's conclude this autopsy with some actionable treatments. How do mature organizations use these exact case studies to bulletproof their own facilities? Simple. They don't just react, they actively hunt for vulnerabilities. They hold quarterly, cross-functional reviews of industry warning letters. They update the site's formal risk register based on those external trends. They rigorously apply that could this happen here analysis to every single case. They establish an anonymized disclosure protocol to share lessons externally. They implement Stage 3, continued verification, as a routine, totally non-negotiable activity. And crucially, senior leadership champions a no-blame culture for reporting. When mistakes are learning opportunities instead of blame events, people speak up before things turn into multi-million-dollar consent decrees. As we wrap up Module 12, I want to leave you with a really important thought. Industry events are warnings, not entertainment. Reading through FDA warning letters is completely pointless if it doesn't immediately translate into specific, local risk mitigation at your site. So I want you to really think about this. If your CEO or an FDA inspector walked onto your shop floor today, pointed to a recent catastrophic industry failure, and asked you about it, could you give a specific, evidence-based answer that it couldn't happen here? Could you prove it with your controls, your HBL limits, your material-specific recoveries, and your Stage 3 data? If you can't, well, it's time to get to work. Continuous learning isn't just a compliance check. It's the ultimate strategic advantage. Thanks for joining me on this explainer, and I'll catch you next time.